I think of Mike O'Donnell as my business dad. He is the most loving and supportive, and sometimes reality checking presence in my business. He's on my board of advisors, and he's always been there for me to support BizHack and my entrepreneurial growth. He has the most extraordinary background that you'll learn about in a second, but I'm so grateful to have him in my life, and I wish all of you could have a mentor like him in your life too. Mike, such a big believer in mentorship. He's even written a book about it, and he has stories about the mentors that have helped him in his journey running building and scaling and selling multiple companies. The other thing I'll mention is because of my storytelling background and expertise, and I think because Mike likes me, he also invited me to be on his board of advisors, his board for Lee's Legacy Project. And so I know a lot about this company, and I've been kind of in a front seat position to watch its evolution and growth in the last stage of its 20-year journey. And so with that, Mike O'Donnell, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate the kind introduction, and thank you all for attending today. I hope you're going to find it both informative and productive. And I'll be making myself available after the course to any of you who want some guidance or some help in crafting your own narrative, your own stories of you as a founder, as a business owner, or just a story of you in your working career. So I am available after the course. And of course, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the tool that you can use to get started on that. So just a quick little background on me. I am a serial tech entrepreneur, very fortunate to have raised venture capital for most of my ventures and starting and building these companies. Spent many years as a startup mentor and as an adjunct professor for various programs, including University of Miami and Broward College Entrepreneurial Experience, BMT. I love helping entrepreneurs and mentoring them because that's how I was able to start my companies and build my companies, was because I had very good guidance and mentorship from others. And the reason I give back to people like Dan and you is because I just think there's no better way to give back than to help people realize their dreams of building a company and bringing new products and innovations to market. I did spend a couple of years as a venture capitalist, so I've been on both sides of the table, not only as an entrepreneur, but as a funder, as an investor. Also invested in many companies as an angel investor. For 10 years, I did M&A. So having been through the cycle a couple of times, I started helping other tech entrepreneurs to sell their companies and learned a lot about that whole process, about exiting, having exited my own companies and then helping others. And then these days, principally focused on the Lee's Legacy projects, which we'll talk about a little bit here. So to lay the groundwork for this conversation, and it is interactive, please ask questions, Dan will be moderating. I thought I would just start with some of these iconic stories you're probably familiar with and tie their stories, the company stories, to the founder stories, and why they've become not just stories, but lore. I mean, true lore in our society and our culture. So most people know the story of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. They started Apple Computer in Steve Jobs' garage. They just didn't start a company. When you think about it, they launched the startup revolution. They ushered in a whole era of entrepreneurship. It became iconic to start your company in a garage, and sort of the moral, the inspiration for all of us entrepreneurs was, hey, I don't have to go to work for corporate America. I can start a company with no money in my garage, and I can innovate and help change the world. And so Apple is emblematic of not just the company or the founder story, but actually helping to launch an entire cultural revolution in this country of entrepreneurship. And they were ground zero for me and many others. And so that's really part of their story and how important that story is. Jumping to Microsoft, some of you may a little bit know another really cool kind of story and some lessons for us entrepreneurs. Bill Gates and Paul Allen grew up together. They were boyhood friends. They went to high school. They were sort of the nerdy, geeky programmers. They were writing programs and games for the mainframe computers, for the minis. But they just kind of knew instinctively that this thing called the personal computer was going to come out and it was going to change everything. They didn't know when, they didn't know where, they didn't know how, but they didn't want to miss it. And so they're roommates at Harvard, and Bill picks up Popular Mechanics magazine. He's reading through it. And he goes, "Oh my God, Paul, the Altair 8800 has just been launched in Albuquerque, New Mexico." No, not Silicon Valley, not Seattle. The first personal computers in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he goes, "We can't miss it. I'm dropping out of college." Now, how many people would do that, right, to pursue this passion dream? He drops out, flies to New Mexico, cuts a deal with the Altair computer, first personal computer, says, "Look, Paul and I, we've written this program called BASIC. It's a computer programming language, and it's really going to add a lot of value to your computer." And that was his first licensing deal and set the stage for what became their model, which was licensing software. But not long after that, and he started Micro-Soft, by the way. That's his name of it, Micro-Soft. So Big Blue comes knocking. IBM knocks on their door and says, "Hey, we hear you guys write software for the new personal computer. We're thinking about getting into the personal computer business. Do you have an operating system?" And Bill says, "Yeah, we've been working on it. We can demo it to you in a week or so." And they say, "Great," and they leave. And Alan looks at Gates and says, "Bill, what are you talking about? We don't have an operating system." And so the story of entrepreneurship, right? Bill says, "Yeah, but we know where to get one." Tim Patterson across the bridge, Seattle Computer Company, had something called QDOS, Quick and Dirty Operating System. He sends Paul over the bridge. They buy it for $50,000. They rename it MS-DOS, and the rest is history. And so the lesson there is you don't even have to invent it. You can sort of hijack it. But they then became known for being the operating system company, which essentially created a monopoly for many years and licensed that operating system, like they did BASIC, to all the different personal computer manufacturers. But not to be undone by that shrewdness, Zuckerberg comes along about 20, 25 years later, incidentally also at Harvard. The Winklevoss twins approach him and say, "Hey, we hear you're a very talented programmer guy, and we have this idea for a social network for college students called Connect You. And we really like you to develop it, partner with us and develop it." And he said, "Sure, I'll get right on it." And he's telling them that he's working on it. And then he launches independently the Facebook, which was the name of the company. And of course, which led to all kinds of lawsuits. By that time, guess what? Game over. He had already won. So the moral of the story for us entrepreneurs is it's not about the idea necessarily. It's about how well you execute on it. But my favorite story of all is Fred Smith, probably my inspiration for starting my companies. I don't know if you know the story of FedEx. So he was a student at Yale, and Fred wrote his paper in a business class on his idea for an overnight delivery service. He got a D on the paper. His professor told him it was probably the dumbest business idea he had ever heard. It was never going to work. Undaunted, Fred goes home, cashes in the family fortune, not really supposed to, but invests the trust that the family had built up for him and his sisters, and invests it in FedEx. He's sued by his family. He's being sued by his family for squandering the family wealth to start this company. He's fighting lawsuits. He's trying to build this company. He's down to his last $5,000. He flies to Vegas because he's been courting investors, and they want to see this thing operating. Right? They've been following it. They can't just shut down, right? So he flies to Vegas and he gambles on blackjack and roulette. His last $5,000, makes enough money to make payroll and to put fuel into his 2 airplanes so they can keep going. And the story for entrepreneurship's there. The lore of that is, look, and investors, of course, found all of this out. And the lesson for us entrepreneurs was money does not invest. They don't bet on the horse. They bet on the jockey. The horse is the product. It's always going to evolve. It's always going to be changing. But the thing that really is going to drive companies and create these remarkable products and these stories is the founder. And so those all sort of weave together to paint a picture for you how important it is for you to craft your narrative, your story, and how your personal story is intertwined with your company's story. And you then and your company can become iconic and you can become legends in your own right. So I hope that laid the groundwork. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I wanted to dig in a little bit here, and guys, feel free to put questions into the chat. Um, and there's, by the way, a request, Mike, for your book about mentorship. So if you could just throw that in there. But one of the things that I remember from the founder of Lovesac, which is a company that makes expensive couches with interchangeable parts, is that he talked about the power of the Lovesac story as the root hack. The root hack. So BizHack, like Life Hack, is about shortcuts to business growth. And the root hack is to tell your story, right? It's the most powerful business growth mechanism. It's the one that is at the heart of all other approaches. And it, as you can see, is used by the largest companies in the history of the world. So I wanted to ask you, Mike, why does the root hack of telling your founding story work?
Because it connects with people emotionally and it creates loyalty. It creates lore. Whether you hate or love the founders or even their products, you can't help but be impressed and swayed by the stories of how they created their companies and how they got to where they are.
I love the use of the word lore, because I really have come to believe that these stories are the modern Greek mythology of our culture.
Exactly.
Like, people stood around in fires, and Homer told stories of Odysseus and Achilles. And these were the ways that people learned lessons and entertained themselves. And we have exactly that situation, but instead of Achilles or Odysseus, it's Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. And we know these stories so intimately. Like, Jeff Bezos's history, his background, where he grew up, how the company started. Same for Elon Musk, and it's when you have a company like NVIDIA come on the scene, you almost immediately start wondering about Jensen Huang and what's his history and where did he grow up and what is his background. And you can see that, like, a company like that hasn't actually really done as much of a job as these others in getting that story out there.
Yeah.
And so NVIDIA, if I were going to talk to the NVIDIA CEO, I'd say, get that narrative out there now, start shaping it before it's shaped for you, right? Because it's not an accident. It's not an accident that these companies, these companies' stories. There's a team of people and an explicit strategy around storytelling around the founding, because it creates a mythology. Like, to me, Apple and Microsoft are really good examples of companies that have owned their story, and Facebook is a good example of a company where its story has gotten out of its hands.
So
Because
true.
the story of Facebook is ugly. The story of Facebook is misogynistic and disregarding privacy. The face mash, which was the original, was really basically a way to compare women and who was hot and who wasn't. And the founding story of Zuckerberg arguably stealing the idea, the founding story of Zuckerberg screwing people over, the founding story of Zuckerberg kind of mercilessly eliminating co-founders, the founding story of Zuckerberg completely disregarding people's privacy. It's the seeds of the company culture. Like, Facebook and Meta has everything I just described has been like a continuing theme of that company.
Yeah.
And
But
I don't like them.
they're still winning.
They win because of technological expertise and just incredible. I mean, there's a lot that makes them incredible, but I think the one thing to keep in mind about Facebook is, with the possible exception of TikTok, they're like the only social media company that's made any money. LinkedIn has been a money loser by and large, and these other platforms like Snapchat and Pinterest have struggled mightily. So he is a fearsome entrepreneur, genius, psychopath, sociopath, more in the kind of Elon Musk. I mean, the one other thing I'll say before we move on is I struggle a lot with the following, Mike, which is I don't really know what to learn from these people.
I think
Like,
I pointed some of it out, that we as entrepreneurs can learn some of the core elements of why they became successful. Zuckerberg, it's not about the idea, it's about the execution. Fred Smith, it's not about the horse, it's about the jockey. Bill Gates, he didn't invent it. He sort of hijacked it and made it his own. So there's some powerful stories, powerful lessons for people within these stories. That the lesson for the people on this call is the story is the unifying heartbeat of your company, because it's going to meander and you're going to have different products and you're going to have good times and bad press and good press. But your story is the heartbeat. It's the unifying heartbeat. And as Dan said, you want to curate that and cultivate it so it doesn't get away from you like it did Facebook.
beautifully said.
Okay, so so how my story intertwines with what I'm doing with the Leaves Legacy Projects. My parents, they worked hard their whole lives, good, solid, middle class, worked 30 years, raised 5 kids, retired to their dream home in Gulfport, Mississippi. And a year later, a 25-foot tidal wave came in and essentially wiped out the entire town. They left about an hour before the storm hit. They weren't going to go. We finally talked them out, to get out, which they did just in time. The neighbors that did not, friends and neighbors that did not leave, they all died. But the sad thing about it was, happy that my parents survived, but that house, which nothing but the foundation was left, was where our entire family heritage was stored. Generations of family photo albums, family movies, cards, letters, stories, birth certificate, marriage certificate, military papers. My mom was sort of the family historian and the collector, not only of her life and my dad's life and her kids' life, but also of their parents and their grandparents. And so that one house held everything that my tribe was about, and it was gone like that, just completely destroyed. So there was this profound sense of loss because, I was raising 3 kids and I had grown up on these family photo albums, looking through my grandmother's family photo albums, and my kids would actually come and visit my mom and dad, and they would go through, and my mom and dad would play, video home movies of me as a kid opening presents at Christmas time and battling with and it's all part of your heritage. And then it was all gone, and it was just this profound sense of loss, and that's sort of incubating how that problem can be fixed. So from that setback launched me into this 20-year journey, as you'll see shortly. What I set out to do, being a tech guy, I'm a problem solver, and I think I can use technology and tools to solve any problem. And then certainly thereafter, my mother had a stroke. She could no longer talk. She could no longer walk. And it was left to me. So I set out on this mission to recover my heritage. And I started calling and emailing and writing letters to aunts, uncles, cousins. I reached out to people who were in my parents' wedding 50 years before I had never even met, but was able to keep tracking these people down and say, please, I'm going to send you money. Scan your photographs. Make copies of any home movies that you have for me. Reel-to-reel tapes were popular back in the day of my parents and even grandparents. And so I paid for them to make copies. And I started to weave back together, this heritage of mine with these photos. And I was interviewing these people. So I would get them on the phone, or I would see them, I would go and visit them. And I interviewed them about their stories and how they intertwine with my parents' stories. And I learned how to interview people about their life and how to capture and write these stories over dozens of people. And in that process, I began discovering all new stories I never even heard, things that my parents had done and things that my grandparents had done. And I would at dinner time, I would tell my kids about these new stories that I had just discovered, and realize that a lot of our heritage is never even written down. You know, there's an old saying, you only die when the last person who remembers you also dies, right? So they're handed down verbally, and I just knew there had to be a better way to sort of capture these in a written format. And why I'm going through this process, this took 5 years. 5 years of me calling people, interviewing, going and visiting them, sending them money to scan things. 5 years trying to weave back together my heritage. People would say, well, what are you doing in your spare time, Mike? I said, well, I'm trying to recover my heritage, which was lost in Katrina. And remarkable, people say, the same thing happened to us. We lost our stuff in a flood in Minnesota. The California fires recently, I've heard from people who've reached out. Everything they had, all of their family heritage, their albums, their photo albums, all of that stuff just gone. And I realized it's a common problem. People would say, hey, we got up to my grandparents' attic after they passed away. It had all been eaten by rats. It was moldy. So all of these things get lost. And I'm like, well, how does that make you feel? And inevitably, people would say, I'm sad about it. That's my heritage. And it's kind of who I am. It's my tribe. And I'm not able to hand that down to my kids. And so I do have some regrets for not getting involved earlier in trying to capture and preserve my heritage. And so that inspired me, that it wasn't just me had gone through this setback, this problem. Many people, I'd say over 50% of the people I talk to, same story.
Pause. This is too good. So I want to dissect what Mike just did from a storytelling perspective, because he just did the classic move of story of me, story of us. So the story of me is the personal narrative, go back one slide, of why you do what you do and why it matters to you. And in this case, it is a trauma story. It is a tragedy that befell his family and losing its legacy. Now, 99% of people who are victims of a hurricane leave the story of me at that. They have a horrible personal loss, they suffer, and they move on. Mike O'Donnell is that special individual who saw in that tragedy, in that trauma, a call to action. And he went from setback to solution. Now, why did Mike appoint himself the solver of this problem? Is a deeply psychological question that goes into his upbringing and his personality and his experiences that we're not going to explore today, but that's an example of something I do explore with my clients when we're doing story-driven growth exploration, because I do want them, if nothing else, for their own sake, to understand why they feel compelled to be an entrepreneur and why they feel compelled to solve this particular problem, why they've essentially appointed themselves and anointed themselves as the person to fix this. But what I want to do is, from a public perspective, that's more of a personal understanding, and it really helps to understand why you do what you do and how that's rooted in your psychology, your history, your personality. But in terms of the public, what Mike just did is he did the story of me pivoting into the story of us. He said, I had this horrible tragedy befall me, and for the last 20 years, I have been dedicated to creating a scalable solution using technology to make sure that no one else ever has to experience the loss that I did. And I started by asking other people, hey, have you ever had something like this happen to you? And found that more than half the people I spoke to had experienced a loss of family heritage, maybe not because of a hurricane, maybe just because of a move or a death in the family, but that there is a epidemic, if you will, of the loss of personal family heritage and history that I believe I am uniquely qualified to help solve for. Right? That is story of me and the story of us. And it is textbook. Like Mike just did that pivot so beautifully. Now, if he were talking to a different audience, this is an audience of users, right? These are business owners and marketers who may very well want to use his product in their business. And we'll talk to you about a way to do that and some tools that we've built and we're going to offer to you for free to help do that. But Mike, if this were a investor audience and this was a pitch deck and this was the story of me, story of us that was part of a request for money to invest, how do you think you might have shaped the story of us a little differently? Or what additional elements would you incorporate or highlight to help round out the story of us and to make it something that, let's say, an investor would want to participate in?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so same as the story with Fred Smith and FedEx, I would say, look, I'm really uniquely qualified. There are other solutions out there for life stories. Storyworth is, they advertise on NPR. There's all kinds of different services for it. But why you should invest in me is I'm really uniquely qualified, not only having lived it and recovered it and done these interviews and become an expert on how to tell life stories, but I have the tech background. I was always on the leading edge of technologies, and VCs, other investors would invest in me and my visions for these other solutions. And this one is bigger than any that I've ever done. I mean, it impacts the entire world, billions of storytellers, right? And so if you're going to bet on the jockey, not on the horse, I'll be a good bet.
There are two things in my experience that VCs and investors are looking for. And the first is, an idea that they believe can scale and target a large market opportunity that's underserved. And then second is the team behind it, starting with the founder. And so Mike's story of me, story of us really addresses that second big item that every investor wants to know, which is this person going to make this happen or die trying? Is this person going to invest every cent and every second that they have disposable to make this succeed? Do I believe that this person has that level of dedication? Because if they don't, even if they have a great idea, I don't think this is an investable company. So there's the qualifications, the history, and then there's that intangible belief in the passion of the founder and their unwillingness to take no for an answer. And if you look at every business history, there are moments of near death that were overcome essentially due to the resilience and creativity and refusal to die of the founder. And so an investor needs to believe that. How do you make them believe that? By telling them, like, look, this company, this Leaves Legacy project is going to be etched into my gravestone, right? Like, this is my legacy, and I will not stop for anything or anyone. And how do you know that's true? Because I've been doing this for 20 years, and I haven't stopped. And I'm at an age and a stage in my career where I could be doing a lot of stuff, and I choose to build this company. I'm not doing it for the money. The money needs to be there to make this scalable and to touch the people I want to touch. I want this to be a big solution, not a small solution. And that's why I need you to invest in this. But I don't need you. Like, I'll go find the money from someone else if you don't believe it, but I'm not stopping. Like, this is just the first of many meetings I'll have. And it's up to you if you want to jump on this train, but this train is leaving the station with or without you. Right. Like that's the sort of attitude. And that's and you know, you hear somebody say that and you're like, this dude's gonna succeed. It's not a fit for me, but there's no doubt in my mind that this guy isn't gonna let up. This is gonna happen. Now he's also smart enough and experienced enough that he'll adapt to the marketplace. So it might not happen exactly the way he thinks. It won't, I can guarantee it, but he's not gonna stop.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Putting it into context, it'd be hard for me to say all that, but you're hired as my fundraiser.
I'm your PR dude. But the point is, guys, that the emphasis changes when you're talking to an investor than when you're talking to a potential user. Like right now, we're trying to romance you as users to get excited about the solution and ultimately try it out. Let's just be frank, right? We're marketers. That's what we're trying to do. And at the end, we're going to give you an opportunity to do that, and you'll get to opt in or opt out of it. Some of you will raise your hand and say, I'm in. This is psych. This is so cool. Others will say, not for me. And so this is a kind of top of the funnel marketing opportunity. We're leveraging storytelling to get you excited about it. And ultimately, there will be a call to action and a follow up based on your interest, opting in or opting out. And that's marketing for users. But with an investor, it's a different ask, right? Which is for them to invest millions of dollars in an idea. And they do need to believe in that founder and that he's not going to stop. And that this is an opportunity and the train is leaving the station and they're in or they're out. All right, so you've got this idea, you have the story in terms of users, investors, and now you need to like make sure that you're not just building a solution for yourself.
That was the big decision. Is this just for me, stitching back together my heritage and recollecting these stories, or everything that I've learned? Do I want to bring it to the world? Do I want to create a solution that's going to help fix the problem for other people, not just for my own family? And so to validate that, I went ahead and called up retirement communities all over the country. A lot of them were in Arizona. We were in Florida. Remember, I was living in Seattle at the time. So I was flying to Arizona and Florida, which are too big. And I would just call up these retirement communities and say, hey, I'm Mike O'Donnell. I've learned a lot about how to write life stories. I've helped to write dozens now over the last 5 years, including my own. And I think it might be something that your residents might be interested in. Can I come talk? And we love speakers. Anything we can do to try to keep our community active. And so I would walk into these retirement communities, into these big rooms, and they were packed. I was astounded. People on walkers, in wheelchairs, they've got their oxygen mask and they're sitting in this room and they're just fascinated. They just want to learn how to do this. Like it's just this big pent up demand. I had no idea, but everywhere I went, Florida, Arizona, active retirement communities, more senior retirement communities, standing room only. And of course, in that process, I teach them, of course, how to do it for themselves and for their family. And I'd ask, how many have you done it? And almost none had. How many you want to? Everyone raises their hand. A few people would come up and say, I did it. They would hand me this little book, this little line book where they wrote maybe 10, 15, 20 pages. I mean, just a snippet really of their life, but they were at least proud of having done that. So then I asked these questions like, so what's the holdup? What's taking you so long? And then this is the things that they would play back. It's just overwhelming. It's such a daunting task to write about my entire life, which then I learned you don't want to write a story about your entire life. Your life is a series of stories. And that's where all these other solutions are going wrong. They say, we're going to help you write your life story. There is no such thing as a life story. There's not a book big enough. Your life is a series of stories and milestones. And so that was a super good insight. They don't know where to start. They would rather be interviewed rather than them just trying to come to the top of their heads. They don't know that anyone's going to care. My kids, my grandkids, I don't think they're going to read it. I don't even know what they want to know about my life. I'll tell you, these are all things that are fixable with tools and technology. They would say, I'm not a good writer. I'm a horrible writer. Even with spell check and grammar check, I'm still not a good writer. I'm not a good oral storyteller. I think what I'm going to produce is going to be boring. It's not going to be engaging. And so I'm not motivated to spend all of this time trying to capture this when it's just going to sit on the shelf. Or I can't afford a writer. I can't afford a biographer. Some people charge $10,000 to write a life story. And then the analog and the digital archives have no business. Like I've done some of this, our family movies, my sister-in-law has them, they're in the attic. No one ever sees them. There's no visibility into them. So when you start learning about all this, I'm like, I'm a technology guy. These are all fixable things with the right thought out solution. And that's what helped create this journey. So you can see the x-axis is time. I've been at this for 20 years and haven't even really launched yet. 20 years and not even really publicly launched. It's been a series of alpha, beta releases and soft launches, friends, family. We did a soft launch recently, and then the y-axis is the money I've spent, which at this point is about $500,000 of my own money, creating, testing, doing this research. So 5 years of incubation, doing my heritage, learning how to tell stories. And then I finally hired a programming team and did a solution in 2011, 2013. But the technology wasn't there yet. It still involved a lot of manual processes, in interviewing, in writing, in editing. And I wanted something scalable. I mean, there was already a bunch of solutions to do this manually, right? Storyworth and Life Memories and a bunch of others. So I didn't want to just replicate that. I wanted something that you didn't need, technology would do this heavy lifting for you. And lo and behold, 2022, AI comes out. And being a tech guy, I'm fortunate. I was on the beta for ChatGPT. I was on the beta for Bard, which became Google Gemini. I was on the beta for AWS Bedrock and Sage, which were their early AI tools. And so we got to play with these models, me and my team, and get in early on the ground floor of AI and figure out how to deploy them, how to tweak them, how to do prompt engineering correctly. And that took a couple of years. And that ended up, which is our core technology, creating the virtual biographer storytelling engine, which is what you would use if you wanted to tell your life story or your business story or the story of you right now. And then speech cloning came out, which really, really facilitated it. So right now, using our app, you just record a 30-second snippet and it'll record all of your stories from then on out in your own voice. You can, if you have a clipping, of which I do, of your mother or your father or your grandmother on a tape, like on an old VHS tape, you can put it into our app and then her whole story can be told in her voice, even though she's passed away. So the technology has just really come a long way. And then being able to take the stories and turn them into output that's super engaging, super entertaining, so much fun. So it's not just a book, right? You can do a podcast with these stories, or you can create a very engaging video. So that's been the journey. And we did a minimal viable project. You see MVP, we've had 3 iterations, all as a progressive web app. And those of you that are technology people on this line, that's so much quicker and less expensive to develop a PWA than native apps, right? When you do native apps, I mean, you're committed and you're kind of locked in, and it's a lot more expensive and difficult to update. So we've had to be through all of these different cycles. And then we are here right now. We're literally a month away from publicly launching, doing the hard launch and launching the native apps. So that's my 20-year journey, and we're not even fully launched yet.
What I love about this story is stasis. Like, I just want to say that I think there's a lot of bravery that goes in blowing a bunch of time and money and then shelving it, but not throwing it away.
Exactly.
And I just am curious, like that to me is a lot of this is very typical. I think the stasis is atypical. And I'm just curious, when you started the stasis, when you basically like the technologies and where it needs to be to make this a scalable product, did you say, I'm moving on and this is over in your head, or did you, no? So tell
That's
me
right.
about that. That like, how did you have the wherewithal, courage, stubbornness to like shelve it but not forget it?
So back in those days, we had this thing called machine learning, which machine learning is essentially now become AI. AI is just an advanced form of machine learning, right? A little bit more intelligence, a lot more data, a lot more crunching. And so I was experimenting with machine learning and knew it was in its infancy. And just having done the whole 30-year technology thing from the introduction of the personal computer through software, internet, mobile phones, I knew that that was going to get better. And of course, everyone was talking about AI, but no one knew exactly how it would manifest itself as a consumable technology. But I was just waiting, and and told my co-founder and my friends, look, let's just bide our time. Let's continue doing research. So we amassed 3,000 questions on every life story topic there is: weddings, births, graduation. So we were doing our homework in the back, waiting for technology to catch up so that we can train these models.
Yeah, so much of business success is timing.
Yes.
And fortunately, the technology got to where it was, but also fortunately, you were in a life position where you could actually jump on the opportunity, right? Like that's the other piece of timing, which is maybe you would have been just busy with something else, or your interest had shifted, and it wasn't going to be something you were going to pick up. And I think that what's kind of cool here is this definitely feels like a technology that's meant to be, but it's definitely a really tough business. I think evidenced by Ancestry.com's bankruptcy. It's just this life legacy space is so vast and underserved, and it's not an easy business to build.
Yeah, and I'm happy for someone to steal it and take it to the next level. My job would have been done.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are in a better position to do that, like 0 to 1, as Peter Thiel calls it, like take an idea and bring it to market and prove that there's a need for it. Not all of us who are good at 0 to 1 are good from 1 to 100. It's like a different skill set. One thing, I trash talk Zuckerberg a lot, but he's a guy who went from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 1 million uh, with a skill that is enviable. Like he's a really talented entrepreneur. I wish he wasn't such a jerk of a guy. But I do really admire his business acumen. And there are like moments in the history of Facebook that are really just really profoundly smart from a business perspective. They've done a lot of really smart things. But let me, before we move on from Mike's 20-year journey, you have a lot of friends and supporters on this call right now. Is there anybody in the group who wanted to just unmute and ask Mike a question? I see Bobby Mullins put in a really nice comment. Bobby, do you want to share about your journey in the nonprofit?
Sure. What I heard more or less from Mike was the fact that it takes time to do these things, and oftentimes, um, when we're building a business or we're transferring from, say, for profit to a nonprofit in retirement, um, there's a lot of things that get in the way, and my attitude, I guess, and my desire to do this is exactly like you said. I was willing to give up everything to be able to do what it is that my nonprofit's going to do, which is teach fatherless children that there's many things that they don't know, that if they knew, that they could be more successful at an earlier age than they realize. So, and that only came from starting a business, doing really well in defense contracting, and then retiring from that. But I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I have to be doing something. So But you find that there's all these obstacles that you would think that you would already know exist, but you find out that you're surprised on several levels, and it slows you down. So you can have a plan, you can execute as best you can to that plan, but there are things that in the unknown that occur, that at the very least slow you down and sometimes stop you. And then when you get to that point, then your own self behavior becomes an issue, because you're trying to say, is this really worth it?
Yeah.
Is what I'm going to do really worth it? And you're making decisions and going back and forth. But what I saw from Mike is all these things eventually come together, and when they do, it's going to be something great.
Yeah,
Thank you
Bobby,
so much.
Bobby, the way I justified it, I said, if nobody ever buys this, I will. It's like, it's going to work for me.
So, Mike, I wanted to skip the next slide and go right to the virtual biographer tech, because I think there's a lot
I
of
think Alexa had raised her hand. Alexa, do you have-
Yes, I just wanted to share. This is so exciting to be here and just listen to the story and how everything comes together. My story actually involves BizHack a little bit because I was in an amazing nonprofit doing great work. And the mission was connecting those in need with those who can help. And I began really connecting companies with nonprofits because that was connecting those in need. I was seeing that that connector piece was really lacking. And so then when I was asked by a huge company, what are you, a broker? I was just like, no, they need you, or a board member or someone. And what I noticed was when I was taking these companies to see these nonprofits serving thousands of people a month, is that they would tell them the story of how they, how maybe they were built and well, who they served and what they did. And I knew these people, and I knew that for 7 years, they didn't get a single dollar, of salary. And I did, and I was there to just say, hold on. I know that that's wonderful, but can we go back to can you just let her know how much did you start making this year? $35,000, is it? And that just really, now they have a board member from that company at that nonprofit. And I think, when that it's super exciting to just kind of hear all this, because then I kind of jumped the boat and left that nonprofit. And now I'm building my own social impact consulting firm that I want to be like the hub to kind of help the sector and unite and become that connector. So there's a lot of those pieces that even Bobby was mentioning, and just going out and realizing how little maybe sometimes people really do share and how crucial those pieces are to take them to that next level. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Alexa, and good luck on your own journey.
So, you want
Mike,
to jump here?
Yeah, let's go to there. I think there's a lot of interest in what is the virtual biographer, and we're going to give you guys all a chance to try it out after this session.
Yeah, so this is what we've been working on. It's all stems from that 5 years worth of research, and during the time that it was in stasis, collecting data points to be able to create this thing called a virtual biographer, which essentially is a storytelling engine trained specifically to tell life stories, marriages, weddings, births, defining moments, starting a company. So whereas most AI is used for generative, how to do customer support and answering questions about businesses, ours is about life stories. And so the first thing is the virtual biographer, like a real life biographer, interviews the subject, not about their entire life all at once, because it's impossible, but about a specific topic. And so the key insight that we have that others haven't yet copied us on, but I think they will eventually, because it's really the only way to do it appropriately, is you have to know what questions to ask. AI doesn't know this, by the way. I mean, if you just went into ChatGPT and said, interview me about my wedding, you would go down a rabbit hole. So it's having the database and the knowledge of having done this dozens of times that you'd have to know what questions to ask, how many to ask, and in what order, and how you pace those out. So for Dan, working with Dan, for example, Dan is an expert on Story of Me and origin stories for startups. And he and I collaborated on how to train the virtual biographer to take you down this path. I couldn't have done it without Dan. Dan wouldn't be able to automate this without the virtual biographer. But that's the beauty here, is that anybody who is a domain expert in something in their business, whether it's a nonprofit, you'll see some case studies here in a minute. We know how, our storytelling engine knows how to train the AI model, how to do the prompt engineering, to ask the right questions in the right order, how many to ask. And then it also prompts recall. So we did a thing with my high school reunion. I'm co-chair of my 50-year high school reunion. We can, during interviewing people about their life and their high school experience, we can transport them back to their prom and play the song that was playing at their prom. We have a huge database of, we can tell you who was president, what was going on in the world, what was going on in your own town. We can show you pictures, we can play music. And so it's stimulating the memories of this period of your time that people are writing about, which is very powerful. And that hasn't even been fully implemented yet, but we've been building it in the background. And then it asks for additional input. So even though the interview is done, this prompt recall gets people to put in oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, let me write about that, or let me talk about that. It then will write the story in any tone and style, which is pretty remarkable. So you could write it in the first person. Hey, I'm Mike. Let me tell you about my wedding. Or, hey, let me tell you about Mike and Patty's wedding. Right? So being able to tell the virtual biographer to write it in the first person or the third person, have someone else narrate your story versus you telling it in your own voice is very, very important. And then you can pick what emotion you want to use. Dramatic. You want it to be dramatic. You want it to be reflective. You want it to be nostalgic. You want it to be exciting. You want it to be funny. So the virtual biographer will also write it, not only in the first person or third person, but also what emotional style do you want to use. It then, once it writes the story, and it does it in 15 seconds. So you think about all the writing I had to do for my family story, which took months, years. Now, after the interview, the virtual biographer writes the story in 15 seconds, based upon all of your inputs and answers to the questions. It then will you just say, I want it to rewrite it, but rewrite it a little bit more serious. Don't be so flowery, whatever. So you can then put in some additional instructions after you see the first version, click go, and the story will be automatically rewritten. But really remarkable speed and efficiency, and highly, highly accurate. And everyone who's done it, they just can't believe how good it is. And it's still their voice. It's their story. It's just written super well, just as if you had hired an editor. It then allows you to insert photos and video clips anywhere in the narrative that you want. You can add narration by recording a snippet of your own voice for 30 seconds, and it'll narrate the whole story in your voice. Or you can choose a professional voiceover narrator. We even had Morgan Freeman do one of our stories. So you can choose you can have a celebrity. You can have Oprah narrate your story if you want, assuming you have permission. You can add background music. And then the other thing is it then automatically, it's a production studio in a box. So after the interview's done and the story's written and you've uploaded your media, it then will produce it as a book or a scripted piece, as an audio cast or as a video. So super engaging, short stories. Most of them are, a story of your wedding, or the story of the birth of your child, or the story of how you formed your company. They're usually 5 minutes. But then you put all of these together into chapters, which will eventually complete your life. And then being able to download it, store it locally, it's yours. You can pass it around, but it's also stored in the cloud, so that it can never be lost, like my heritage was lost. My kids, my grandkids, my great-great-grandkids eventually will always be able to get into the digital archive and retrieve these stories and search them by, show me his wedding, or to my grandmother or whatever, and go right to the specific parts of the story they want to tell. So that's what the virtual biographer is, and that's what it does. And a lot of time and money and really smart engineering has gone into its development.
Yeah, and I mean, you can reproduce using a general LLM like a Gemini or a ChatGPT story discovery process and the creation of content from that discovery process. The difference here is Mike spent years training the AI to do this really specific job, both uncovering the story, the times of our life, and then rendering it in a usable way. And what we're seeing a lot is you have these general tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, and then you have these hyper-specific tools for very particular use cases that are highly skilled at a very specific thing.
Exactly.
Now, the big question that I have is, I think we all understand the documenting of the story of me. What I don't think, or the founding story, but I don't think what is as clear is how to use it. So could you talk a little bit about, you're a business owner, and you want to like tell this story. And I was thinking not so much the sub story is one, but the one of the use cases, the examples. Yeah.
Okay. So our trying to reach consumers to tell them how, that we have this tool, this app that allows them to tell their life stories, would be ungodly expensive. I mean, because who do you target? I mean, the investors, everybody wants to see a go-to-market strategy, a target market strategy. So our strategy is not to go to the consumer, it's to go to businesses that already have the consumer for specific stories. So we did a pilot with a funeral home, for example, and they have a co-branded version of the virtual biographer that they make available to their clients, which helps their clients write the eulogy of the person that's just passed away, and also a memorial story about a eulogy is different than a memorial story. So it creates remembrances, and the funeral home co-brands it as their own product and makes it available to their clients. We're doing a pilot now with the Humane Society, so that they can have their members, the people, write the story of how they adopted their pet through the Humane Society and how that pet has become a part of their beloved member of their family and have done fun things. So it's a great way for the Humane Society to reinforce to everybody else who's thinking about adopting a pet. Watch these little 3-minute stories, 4-minute stories, very powerful stories on what the role the Humane Society played in helping people find a next member of their family. And then, of course, with BizHack and Dan, we're doing the startups and business owner origin stories. And there's no charge through a deal I've worked out with Dan. If you want to use that, it's no charge to write or print it. If you want to create the video, there's a nominal charge, but there's no charge to be interviewed, to write your story, to rewrite your story, have it rewrite your story, and then also to print it.
Perfect. And if you want to go on to just the sort of thank you gift, and we can talk a little bit about how, if you're interested in trying this out, there are 2 types of stories that we've created. Mike, do you want to talk about each of the 2 types of stories? And I'll go ahead and paste the links to this. Also, Jose, go ahead and send a chat, send the final survey. And you can also just opt in there, and we'll send you an email with these links included as well.
Yeah, so this whole session is about how important it is to craft your story, and the story of you combined with the story of your company or your nonprofit or the organization that you're working for. And so this part is what's providing you with a tool to help you get started. Now, Dan and I collaborated on the startup story. So if you started a company, you're a founder of a nonprofit or a for-profit company, you would go to this URL, and I think they're going to put it in there. And until May 24th, it's free. It'll interview you, and the tool will help you. The virtual biographer will help you craft that story, which I hope you'll find pretty darn good, pretty remarkable, and save you a ton of time and get a story that you could use for different audiences. And then the story of me isn't necessarily you started a company, but what you do for a living, who you are now and how who you are, like, and your background and what happened in your background, has manifested in what you've decided to do for a living, how you spend your time now in the working world, in the professional world, how that relates back to who you are and what happened in your childhood and teens and early adulthood to lead you to where you are today. It's a slightly different story. The story of me is about you and what you're doing today, even if you didn't start the company.
Perfect. Yeah, the startup story is really designed for a business owner, and talking about how the conditions of when they started the company, what problem they were trying to solve, who the co-founders were, the early history of the company as they were discovering product market fit. It really is only appropriate for a founder. But every professional, including people who work at a company, a startup, have a story of me, which is how does the work that you're doing, how does your day job align with your values? And how do your personal values align with the company's mission? And that story of me, every working professional should have one, and should be aware of how their work aligns with their self. And so that's why we have those two. If you're a founder, you could do both. If you're not a founder, definitely recommend the story of me. The links are in the chat. And if you answered the question, yes, please, we'll also send you an email with these links and some more information. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go back, Mike, before we close out, with the sub-stories. This is one of the more nuanced topics, but I wanted to make sure that we had time to get the Virtual Biographer tool out there, the technology that drives your business, and that offer in case folks have to go. And we might run a little bit past 2 o'clock. I didn't manage the clock as well as I wanted, but Mike's story is so compelling. So I want to make sure we have enough time to do the sub-stories, but get the real technology out there and in front of folks. And so with that, Mike, you talked to me about this concept of sub-stories, of stories, not story. And this is actually a huge discovery that you've made in your entrepreneurial journey with Leaves and Times of My Life project. Can you talk about this idea of stories, not story, and then how that would apply to a company telling their business story to grow?
Yeah, exactly. So when I was doing the retirement community presentations, people just said, I don't even know how to approach the story of my life. And it obviously becomes apparent that it's not one story, it's multiple stories. The story of the key events in your life, your key milestones, the defining moments, the weddings, the births, the graduations, the special vacations, the family holidays. Your life is a series of stories, not one story. And of course, they can be rolled up and presented into what I call a multimedia anthology. And so I've done the same thing with the company. And I've learned a lot of this from Dan, that there are different audiences and different channels. Just like we told the story about Apple and Microsoft and Zuckerberg, there's a bunch of little nuanced stories within the bigger story that is appropriate just for certain audiences or certain channels. So my co-founder, Anthony, who's a brilliant UI, UX designer, he works for Apple in the design department. Does great products. He developed the Hilton app. He developed most of Barry Bonds when he was with the Home Run Kings merchandise and memorabilia. He has his own story, right? His story is not my story, but collectively we created Leaves out of our own separate tragedies. He had his own with the loss of his father and how he was sort of working independently on a way to solve the problem. So when people want to know about the founders of Leaves, we talk about our stories. And there are some publications that I've already written about Anthony and I and our journey to come together to do this. We're from very different backgrounds, but good friends. And he brought the design element and I brought the business element and the knowing how to product manage the development. So that's for one particular channel. The technology, for example, when we did the soft launch of Product Hunt you're probably familiar with Product Hunt, huge company. They love the technology story. They want to know about the technology stack. You know, what did you use? What are all the disparate elements that go into this technology? What's your stack? And that's what they focus on. They love the technology. They don't really care about the founders and our story, why we created it. They want to tell their users about the technology. And then there are others that want to know more just about the products. And we have a series of products. Times of My Life is the flagship product. So we can tell just the story of that app versus the another app we did called the Summary Biography, and another app we're doing, which is called the Family Legacy Archive, so that all this stuff gets stored. So the products are going to have their own stories. And then the company itself, it has its story. We're not a C Corp, you know, we're a public benefit corp. We're mission driven, not profit driven. That's in our charter, and there's certain rules under the law. And so if investors want to invest in that, they have to realize our first priority is the mission in capturing, presenting, preserving people's stories. We think you're going to make good money, but it's not our number one focus. And so that has its own story, right? So that's what I meant by sub-stories, because you can slice them and dice these stories for different audiences and different channels.
It's so interesting. I'd love to like dig into this a little bit more. So the founding story is a kind of universal story. It's we call it the foundation. It's like the substrate. It's there. But what I think you're saying here is, you know, like a diamond, a company has facets, and the different facets may have a distinct story for each one.
Yeah.
So the founder and the reason behind the founding and the story of the founding is kind of a universal story. But then as you get more sophisticated as a company, or as you're talking about different aspects of the company, or you're talking to different audiences, you're going to emphasize different things and also bring in additional stories.
Exactly.
Do you have like a, how do we think about this systematically? Like, do you think about this primarily from an audience-based perspective? Like, who am I talking to? What do they care about? Or how do you approach the sub stories?
Yeah, it's based on the audience and what their motivations are. So like Product Hunt, they're all about the technology and what makes this unique, and how does this app work, and what is the stack. And so I can go deep into that whole story, that whole aspect of what Leaves is. Less so about the company, which they don't care that much about. They don't care that we're a public benefit corporation. You know, the fact that Anthony and I, this stems from tragedy, and for both of us, they're not that interested in that. Their audience is not interested in that. So it really depends upon who is the consumer of the story that's being told.
Yeah, I mean, I can even feel that in real time in this chat. Like there's some people here who are hardcore tech nerds who really wanted to hear about the AI technology. There are others here who are, you know, mission-based leaders who are really inspired by your personal story. And so as a result, some people are gonna love this and other people are not. And I think part of what I love about telling your story is it is a forcing function. It's sort of like either you're with us or you're against us. It generally leads to people to go into camps. Either they're like camp Leaves, they're camp your business, or they're anti. And that's actually extremely useful for a business. Like if they're not feeling this story, it's better that they know that up front and move on to a better partner. Mike, is there, how do you figure out which sub story to tell and how to tell it? Like, do you have any advice or guidance on defining sub stories and deploying them?
It depends So when people reach out to me, like a reporter from the Hollywood Reporter reached out to me after the fire stories, right? And then the fires destroyed so much of LA area. And what she really wanted to know was how people can use this for therapy. Right? That's a whole different thing than just my story or even a technology story. But how therapeutic it is for people who've just had this loss. And some people lost family members or friends. And of course, they lost their house and they lost their heritage. But she wanted to drill down on this exercise as therapy, as healing, a self-healing process, which I was able to talk about it because it was therapy for me. You know, when I lost my heritage in Katrina and going through that whole process of, I mean, it was therapeutic. It helped me overcome the loss, the sense of loss and the sadness that I was feeling. And so we were able to go very deep about that aspect of her story angle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like there's tools like Therabot and Wobot that are actually AI-driven therapists. I also noticed that like one of my Headspace app, which is a meditation app, also has kind of a therapist component that's built in now. So those are AIs that are built to be therapists per se, and they're trained in a very specific way. To document your story is therapeutic,
Yeah.
which isn't the same thing to say it's an AI to give therapy. And
Right.
so, you want to, these AIs are built to solve a certain problem, in this case, to document and tell stories from your life. It isn't primarily designed for businesses, but it is a business tool, and can be leveraged massively for documenting and telling your business story, and to do that at a much faster and much cheaper than was ever possible before. And sort of my ikigai, like my mission in life, is to teach this technique of business storytelling as a growth strategy. And so to have tools and partners like you who are on a different but parallel path is so useful.
Well said. Yeah.
And what I would say about the sort of sub stories methodology, and you can stop sharing now, is that as a business owner, start with your founding story and your story of me. Really understand why you do what you do and why it matters. And then the more you talk, the more you will discover other stories that are relevant to your business. And I think you should just be aware and awake and alive to the fact that there's a lot that's happened in our lives that influence why we do what we do. And so part of the way of honing your skill as a story-driven business is identifying and documenting these stories as tools for growth, and then deploying them strategically in marketing and sales and recruiting and partnership conversations to get the desired effect that you're looking for, depending on the audience you're talking about. That's sort of the technique, right? The technique is identify your root stories, and then identify your sub stories, and then get really smart about when to deploy them.
Yeah. Well said.
And the other thing I'll mention is every single person who works at your company has a sub story, right? So everyone in your company should also understand why they work for the company, why it matters to them, and how the product or service is personally meaningful in the world. And they should have their own way of talking about the mission, and how that connects to them personally and how it makes the world a better place. So there are the stories about the individual, and why they do what they do. And then the why it matters is all about like the impact on your customers and the impact on the world at large. And these are all things that you can document and train your team on, and then deploy in a really systematic way. And if you do that, your company will grow faster. You'll shorten sales cycles, you'll increase conversion rates, you'll build trust faster. And ultimately, people do business with people they like and trust. So that's like really why bother with this, right? Why the virtual biographer could be an essential tool for your small business. We have time for one or two more questions before we wrap up, but I'm really grateful to all of you guys for coming for the first masterclass of our new season and the first masterclass that we've done on story-driven growth. Any questions, anything anyone wanted to share before we wrap up? And by the way, a few of you haven't yet answered the poll, but please do, and we'll follow up with you accordingly. I would love to share with you these free virtual biographer tools. So, Mike, as we wrap up, were there any ahas that you had today, things that maybe you hadn't thought of before, or that you find kind of surprising or interesting or new from today's chat?
That I personally,
Yeah, any
aha
person.
moments for me? The aha for me, I wasn't really sure whether people would understand the importance of it from a business perspective. I always thought everybody would be motivated to do this for their families, for their kids, for their grandkids. It was a highly personal thing. And you've taught me, and then all the people who, I think we had 160 people register, they really want to know how to apply these techniques to business to help their companies. That never really dawned on me really until I met you and until I saw how much interest there is in this topic that you've assembled here. So I guess that's the big aha for me.
Yeah, I had two ahas. One was in the preparation, which was around this idea of sub-stories. It's been floating out there, but this is the first time, I really explored that at any depth and done it publicly. So that was really fun for me. And then the second piece was, just, a reminder that storytelling is polarizing in a really useful way. Like all brands should polarize or they're not good brands. And so a story-driven approach turns some people on and turns others off, right? It feels soft, it feels wishy-washy. Let's talk about the tech, let's talk about the AI, let's talk about algorithms. To me, algorithms are a tool like a hammer that can either be used to build a house or put a hole in the wall. It's all about how you use them. And I'm a huge advocate for how you use them. A lot of business owners don't give a crap. They just want to play with the latest tool, have fun with that. And that's great. And there's a lot of companies out there to serve them. It's just not going to be my company. And so I really like the way storytelling is a polarizing, and it basically allows you to very quickly identify your ideal customer. In many ways, an employee. The only thing that we really have as a business owner, we all want to make a lot of money and have control of our schedules, and then we find that we're not making that much money and our schedules are completely messed up because we're working all the time. But the one choice that almost all business owners do have is who they work with and who they do business with. And so why wouldn't you get out and tell your story in a way that polarizes people and gets you either in Camp Dan or anti-Dan? You know what I mean? I love that. I love that outcome. And really using storytelling as a polarizing factor to identify your ideal target customer and your ideal employee and your ideal partner.
Just to put a cap on that, Adeo Resi, he's the founder of the Founders Institute, which I've done a lot of mentoring for, he used to say, when you start your company, be loved or be hated. Just don't be.
There's a quick case study on this is one of my clients is Back Office Betties. And Back Office Betties is a EA firm. They're a virtual assistant firm for law firms. And there are people who absolutely hate the branding of Back Office Betties because they think of it's founded by a woman. Here, I'll show you the website real quick. It's founded by a woman. It has this, iconic Betty character Betty's is a throwback to the 1950s sort of secretary, and so for many people, for some if not many people, this is not like, they don't want to be associated with this. It's not like appropriate to them. They don't find it funny, which is what it's intended to be. They don't find it lighthearted and cool, and so they're like, no, I just want like a straight-laced, virtual assistant firm for my law firm. And that's perfect, right? Because if they don't have a sense of humor, or they don't feel like they want to be associated with a company that's, brand color is pink, then this is not for them. So this is a beautiful example. And I've spoken to the owner, Emily LaRush, about how polarizing this is in a good way. It's one of the strongest things about this firm, and it's not for everybody. And that's exactly right. Not for everybody. It's a very crowded space, and they stand out. That's what a good brand and what a good story does for you. So with that, I did want to just remind y'all about what we have coming up in season 11. It's next one is in a couple of weeks from now, Wednesday, May 14th, with Mike Pace, supercharging your meta ad campaigns. And then we have additional campaigns on June 11th, June 25th, July, August, and September. The good news is that if you signed up and registered on our website for today's session, you'll get reminders about all of those. So by signing up for one, you'll learn about all of them. With that, I just want to say thank you guys for the time, for the interest, for the attention. And we'll be able to stick around for a few minutes if you guys have any other questions. Mike, thank you. You're a fabulous presenter, I got to say. I really enjoyed listening to you.
Oh, thank you.
So feel free to come off mute if anybody had anything they wanted to chat about. Otherwise, we'll wrap up here in a minute. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much. James Stokes, what do you mean by would be nice to see an end result? Could you share that? What you mean by that?
Well, he's captured all these interviews and done all these things for people. Show us what it looks like, right?
Oh, yeah.
What is it when they're done?
Yeah, I'm sure. Mike, I think what James has asked for is just to see what the end product is. And you'll get to experience this yourself, James, as well when you do it. But absolutely. It's really cool.
I can also understand using the technology in business. One of the things that struck my mind for you is baby boomers leaving the workforce. You could tell the story of how to maintain this machine, what my 30 years of corporate knowledge is, and use that as a training device for new employees.
James, do you currently use that in your business? Is that more of an aspirational, or is it something you actively do?
We've done training on like the basics 101, just videos, right? But there's no AI interaction. There's no thinking to it. It's a canned video that gives everyone the 101s, and then we'd have a personal session with them. But I've been exploring, there's a company from the Netherlands called Jarvis where they have the glasses on. And so what the whole premise of them is to have one subject matter expert connected through the internet to 10 service technicians. So I can tell you where to hit the machine. First of all, it even comes up with a CRM, kind of like Predator, or Terminator, listing all the possible things that could be wrong. And then if not, they can hit the button. It connects with the subject matter expert. But I'm like, they should be gathering all this video to create new training and improve the CRM, which I believe they're doing. So you could use this tool as a similar concept.
I really love that. Yeah. What I would just encourage you, James, in all of your training to incorporate that mission-driven, values-based personal story, like have that just part of everything, because it's ultimately why they work for you, so we don't want to ignore it.
One thing Mike, I can tell you is good stories are invaluable. I've been at many award shows where I'd like to thank the Academy, my hard workers, my clients. and people would talk and do their stuff, but people come out with a story and you could hear a pin drop, right? Everyone's focused and paying attention to that person's story.
I love that.
Especially when it's compelling.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to share some output with the time we have?
Actual stories that have been done.
Yeah, I'm okay waiting because I signed up for the test. I'll see my own story and we'll see what it can do.
Yeah, so we have to get permission, Dan. They're all
You would
protected.
need, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there've been 80, 90 people who've done the story of me and the startup, but it's private unless they decide to share it.
Mhm.
Got it.
It would behoove you in your marketing to get a couple clients to be willing to allow you to show it as a testimonial.
You're exactly right. Thank you for that, James. I'm told that all the time. Like, you got to show people what they're doing. I'm like, I know, but I need to go and get permission.
Yeah. Well, you have my permission, Mike, if you wanted to use mine. Because I do agree. It's do you have like maybe even one of your own videos where it just shows the way it integrates? No? Okay. Well, you know what we'll do, James, is Mike, maybe we could include in the follow-up email just a link.
Yeah.
Maybe to mine or maybe to yours, but yeah, that is a great, we're all sort of learning as we go. That's great feedback, because I agree. It's a lot of blah, blah until you see it.
It's all great and
thoughts?
the AI can do wonderful things.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can send a link and to a lot of the stories that have been published, and we have permission to publish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Terry Page, it's great to have you here. I was wondering if there's anything that jumps out at you from today's presentation, and love to hear your thoughts.
I have so many stories. Got multiple businesses, and one of them, as Mike said, he's been doing 25 years. Well, I'm upping you with 25. Actually, the business that I met Dan with, I've kind of tabled a little bit, but in 2024, another was reactivated. I had a patent for a system that actually eliminates check cashing fraud, which is a part of a story that I'm hoping that I can share with you all, because it seems as if when I tell it, I see people's attention kind of wane. So I need to maybe get some pointers on my key points that I need to hit in the story as I'm telling it, since I've re-engaged with it. In doing that, I'm now using blockchain as the verification method for that business. So I'm super excited for the opportunity to really get some pointers on telling my own story. So that this has really been beneficial for me. I was really looking for how I was going to be a AI whiz, but I got something even better. So Dan, thank you for mentioning me. It's been a long time. I think that was back in about 2000 during the COVID that I went through the Facebook ad session, and I've gone through others with you, but I think that was our beginning point. So all of you that are new and haven't before, I've sung praises. I've sent the text out that I got last night to a number of people mentioning the fact that I've had a wonderful experience with BizHack. And again, if this is your first, I'm prayerful that it'll be many more.
Well, thank you, Terry. You asked about Mike O'Donnell's book, which I just pasted. It's called A True Professional, and it's about his most important mentor. So I just pasted that in there if you wanted to follow up on that. Before we wrap up, Nick Chiecci, I know you are a guy who works in branding as a designer. How did this land for you today? Was there anything that stood out for you? Kind of take us home as we wrap up.
Hey, Dan, great presentation. And as I was going through this, I'm just finishing up a huge project for a client. They're celebrating their 100th year in business. And I'm like, wow, if we had this technology, when we did it the traditional way, we hired a biographer, and I've been working on this project for 3 years now.
Wow.
So something like that. So I'm kind of trying to make the connection from, you know, this this app, this awesome app, versus how, you know, to kind of bring it into the corporate workforce and help companies tell their story. I mean, daunting task of kind of like the traditional task of spending years and years of kind of researching grandfathers, great grandfathers, the origin story. I mean, it's enough that, you know, most people won't do that, even a 100-year-old company. So it's very interesting. And for me, I've been in business for 29 years. And so I'm kind of looking back, and it's kind of forcing me to kind of like, okay, what is my story? You know, how did I start out? You know, and what is, you know, what are the fun anecdotes of that I've had that kind of will help define me versus just being a design firm, you know, being, okay, what are the specialties? Who can I connect with? I'm more of a blue collar kind of roll up the sleeves kind of guy versus, you know, the Harvard educated person. So how do you kind of connect? How do I emphasize that story and be proud of it and attract other people that are like-minded? You know, I've started up with nothing. You know, I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth, and we started bootstrapped. And that's a story, you know, that's a great story. It's like how many other people, how many other companies started out in a garage, you know, and stuff like that. So very interesting and very compelling. And I am totally gonna go through this the app and see what the AI says about me. So great
Sounds
stuff.
great, Nick.
Dan, your program is just always amazing. And I just I have a notebook, a dedicated notebook with the Biz Masterclasses, and need to go back into them because there's so much gold in what you put out. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that. And there's definitely more in store. All right, guys. Too many nice things are being said about me. We got to wrap this up. Take care,
All
everybody.
true.
We'll see you. Thank you. We'll see you in a
Peace
couple
out,
weeks.
guys.
Okay.
Bye-bye.